Look, all this comes in the context in this discussion about working from home, about work-life balance, and I guess happiness. And as I've said, I get the feeling that perhaps people of my generation were more accepting of the misery and drudgery of the daily commute and the fact that that's just being an adult. That's just life with all the joy squeezed out of it, and that's what we do because of our Presbyterian background and our sadomasochistic tendencies. But I was really surprised to read a release the other day from a group that looks at the mental well-being of a profession that I would have thought would be pretty happy because I think they're regarded by the rest of us as privileged and well-paid and powerful in society, and that is the legal profession. But apparently lawyers in New Zealand are the unhappiest in the world. That worries me. My son's a lawyer. My brother's a lawyer of sorts. I know lots of lawyers. They all seem, relatively happy. Why is this, and what can we do about it? We are joined now by Jacqui Maguire. Jacqui is a clinical psychologist, and she works with Life Squared Trust. That's a charitable trust promoting mental health among legal professionals. Jacqui, welcome to the platform. Lovely to have you with us.
Thanks, Sean.
All right, look, can I just say first up, a charity to support mental well-being amongst the legal profession, to me it seems a little obscure and odd. Why would there be such a charity?
Yeah, well, that's a fair question, Sean. And there was a very well-known lawyer in Wellington. His name was Andrew McIntyre. He was my neighbour growing up, and he lost his battle to depression.
I know.
Suicide.
Yeah.
And his wife, Emma, and his best friend, who's also a Sean, decided that they had to do something about the profession. How could they help? How could they grow awareness? What could they practically do so that another person wouldn't end their battle to depression like Andrew did? And so Andrew passed away in 2016. Emma and Sean approached me about a year after. I've worked with lawyers for a long time in my capacity as a clinical psychologist supporting organisational wellbeing, and they said, Jacqui, we really want to do something, but we don't know what. We want to ensure that our investment is effective. And off the back of that, Sean, my view was we know from the research, from the 70s and 80s, really, this research started that legal wellbeing is poor, significantly poor compared to other professions, but we have no New Zealand data.
Because in New Zealand, in context, we would look at farmers and say, they're at risk and things are terrible for them. It just never occurred to me that lawyers, and I suppose it is a high-stress profession. They are essentially sort of glorified wage slaves. They have a lot of, I guess people put a lot of faith in them, or there's a lot of pressure on them. What's the research?
Yeah, I think there are those factors, Sean.
Yeah.
But also I think if you kind of cut to the core of the role of a lawyer, the way in which they're trained to think is pessimistic, it's adversarial. So you can see from first-year law students that their mental health and wellbeing significantly reduces compared to any other professional training program. Primarily because of how they're trained to think. They are trained to look for problems, to see the negative, because that will benefit the client. And in fact, Martin Seligman, who you may have heard of, he's the godfather of positive psychology. In 2005, he showed that pessimism linked to high performance for lawyers. But in every other profession,
God, that's weird, isn't that bizarre?
However, pessimism is really bad for your mental health. If you look glass half full, if you don't see the hope in life, then that is detrimental to well-being. So that is one of the core factors that I think contributes to poor legal mental health. And the other is the focus on extrinsic motivation. So you look at law students, grades and status is really important. You then take that into a commercial law firm and you go, how many billable hours have you done? What's your pathway to partner? And again, we know if you're driven by values and meaning and purpose, intrinsic motivation, that's protective of your mental health. Extrinsic motivators, if you don't have enough of the intrinsic, again, are detrimental to well-being.
Well, that's interesting, Jack. I mean, I got a young man, my son, who was a lawyer, practicing law, and the nicest calls I have with him where he has concluded a dispute And he says, I felt really good. This person was so happy and they can move on with their lives.
Yeah.
And I think that's
and I
a
think
wonderful thing to hear, rather than guess how much money we made out of them or made for them.
Absolutely. And I think, I've had comments of, why, Jacqui, do you support lawyers out of all industries? And I think they're people. You have a son. My uncle is a lawyer. Behind a profession is a person. And I think we have a duty to everyone in this country to go, if we know there is a cohort that is struggling, what can we do about it? And in this case, Sean, I think we have to stop putting the focus into stress management, into resilience training, into how do we make individual lawyers mentally fitter. Whilst those skills are helpful, we know that the change is going to have to come in workplace culture. This research is very clear.
Okay, now I just want to go back to the research. That's a big statement. New Zealand lawyers are the unhappiest in the world. How good's the research? How long? Where else has it been conducted, etc.?
Sure. So this research was conducted by Professor Aaron Jardine out of the University of Melbourne. We commissioned him to do this work. He was the head of the Positive Psychology Foundation in New Zealand for Auckland University for a long time. It's a longitudinal study, so that was important for us, that we had to track data over time. So this data, was collected at 3 points over 3 years, and there are very standard measures in this research that are used worldwide. So, for example, the DASS, the Depression, Anxiety, Stress Scale, that is a psychometric test that has normative standards all over the world. And if you look at the data from this study, it says, for example, that if you take the kind of average on the DASS and you look at that compared to US counterparts, our depression score in New Zealand, for example, was 6.4. In US lawyers, it was 3.5. So we're, double worse off in terms of depression standards. You then compare that, for example, to Australian nurses. So let's take a different country and a different profession. Again, their depression score was 3.27. So, you can look and take those DASS scores from New Zealand. You can compare it to international lawyers. You can compare that to other professions. But what I also think is really interesting is that this study also looks at well-being. So mostly research, Sean, is deficit-based. So they will look at depression, anxiety, burnout, substance abuse. But this also looked at, who's doing well and what's contributing to those that are flourishing or have meaning or have good relationships in their life, the things that we want people to be experiencing. And if you look at workplace culture, those that have positive workplace culture have got significantly better wellbeing rates. Or if you flip that, those that said that their workplace culture was poor, so between 0 and 5 on a 10-point scale, they were 100% worse.
Well, what makes a positive workplace culture?